Aloha. You are in the First Unitarian Church of Honolulu, and my name is Marie Ann, and I'll be your worship associate today. It's good to see all of you on this rainy and marathon day. This means that we're not out marathoning. Please join me in saying these words as Jennifer lights the chalice. We light this chalice with the embers of compassion. We light this chalice with the torch of justice. We light this chalice with the radiance of joy. Katie.
All right. Thanks for bearing with us through our technical difficulties. All right. So, my name is Katie, and I'm going to take a minute. They've given me the silly idea of a microphone, so now I have everyone's attention. I'm going to use my power for good. This year, we are doing, again, for the second time, the adoptive family. Eden Metzger, can you stand up, please? All right. So, because of Eden, we are adopting 2 families, and if she had not stepped up, none of us would be given the opportunity to do that, and that just really, gets me that she would do that, so thank you, Eden. That said, today is the day, and if you want to donate to the family, please do. 2 families. Boxes up there. If you didn't bring stuff, you can write a check, you can send PayPal, talk to Eden, talk to her mom, Katie. If you can't find Eden, Katie's right in front of her. So again, it's a great opportunity. I've stolen the mic long enough. I'm going to get the crook off. All right, so this is Owen, and we're going to be doing our story for ages today. This is Maggie. All right. So with that, a story about freedom from resentment. This is a pig. Hi, Piggy. What are you doing?
Look at my new toy. I love my new toy.
What does it do?
I have no idea.
Maybe it's a throwing toy. I love throwing toys.
Here, try it.
Yes. Zip.
Nice throw.
Thanks. Here it comes. Let's get it.
Break.
I broke your toy.
You broke my toy. My new toy. I'm mad and sad. I'm mad and sad.
I am sorry.
You are sorry.
Very sorry.
I did not care. My new toy is broken. And you broke it.
Wah! Wah!
Cool! You have a snap and break toy. Snap! What a fun toy. That is a fun toy. Enjoy!
Break. Break. Snap. Do you want to play with my new toy?
No.
You do not want to play with my new toy?
I do not want to play with my new toy. I want to play with you. Friends are more fun than toys. You're it.
No, you are.
All right. Thank you so much. Big hand for Owen and Maggie. Thank you. With that, we'll sing our children upstairs, make a bridge.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in
kindness is not to be mistaken for weakness, and nor forgiveness for acceptance. It is about knowing resentment of any kind is not on the path to happiness.
I invite you to join me in this responsive reading by Samuel A. Trombor. Goodness is a means, not an end. Who can stop the hunger for more than we deserve? Who can prevent a jealous thought from urging us to protect our hearts? Who can ward off all the uncertainties that disturb the mind before we decide to act? Were perfection required to be good, all human existence would be a living hell. Embodying love is the endless means to be good. In each moment, love stands at our side, ready to be chosen. Choose wisely. Sounds like a line from The Matrix, don't you think? Remember that scene where they were asked to choose between a blue pill and a red pill? Anyway, today I'm going to begin by asking you a question, really more of a reflection in terms of looking back at 2014. First of all, can you believe we're almost at the end of the year? Time just passes by so quickly. Anyway, how many of you, the question I want to ask is, and don't raise your hand at the moment, please. How many of you have gotten through the year 2014 without being hurt emotionally, without getting dumped, without experiencing grief, without being disappointed by someone you love, without witnessing a pile of dishes in your sink, left probably by the same person that you love, and without complaining about not having people serve on your team or committee and not having them come to every single meeting that you put together? And I love this one, without having to deal with Honolulu traffic. How many of you have gone unscathed with that? And I love, this is the other one I love, and I just witnessed yesterday actually, without being stood up for an appointment. I know some of you may say, get over it, this is Hawaii, right? You're gonna run into flaky people all the time, but you know, it never ceases to amaze me of how much I clear up my schedule and someone doesn't show up. Can you tell I'm a little bit angry about that still? Anyway, I'm not gonna name any names. Needless to say, it's no one in this room, so that's a good thing. But if you have said, no, you haven't experienced any of those, then I'm kind of torn in terms of my response, whether to congratulate you for having lived such a wonderful life in 2014, or telling you to get a life. Because the rest of us have experienced some disappointment or another. And so for those of us who have experienced that list or more, I say to you, a variation of the Miranda Act, you have the right to be resentful. And however, anything you say and do from this point on can and will be used against you in the journey of life, right? So, I'm going to backtrack a little bit more and ask you to stay with that moment. Stay with your top one list of the thing in 2004 that caused you the most resentment. Can you think of that incident yet? It may not have been part of that list that I just mentioned, but I'm sure you could think of at least one incident. And I want you to, at this moment, think about who that person is that was responsible, primarily responsible, for causing you so much headache, heartache, and whatever other ache you're feeling because of that incident. Can you think of that person yet? All right, now I want you to think, I don't want you to say it out loud, but I want you to think of what favor you'd like to give to this person that you're thinking about. And the reason why I don't want you to say it out loud is because it could become incriminating evidence. Our services are being recorded, so if you did talk about this person and what you want to do to them, such as off them, for example, that would not be a good thing. So I could tell that there's already a shift in the energy in this room. Do you feel your shoulders tightening up for some reason? And a rising tension perhaps. So I want to go back and ask you another question. How did you feel during that moment? What were some of the emotions that you were going through as you experienced this traumatizing event in your life? And lastly, I want to ask, who do you think is suffering the most right now from your resentment, right? So interesting questions to ask. So rather than ask for a hand and a volunteer to tell their story out in public, I'm going to give you another story of another person who's experienced trauma in their life and who's experienced an event that would be cause for resentment. This is a woman by the name of Tammy Faye Baker. For those of you who have never seen her, this is what she looks like. And don't you just love that T-shirt to your left? I want to know where I could buy one. Anyway, Tammy Faye Baker, for those of you who were born after the 80s and 90s, was a televangelist wife who was very popular back in the 1980s, and she would be what we would call the epitome of Christian camp, basically, right? So she would get on television and not only preach and sing gospel songs, but she would also cry on cue, and she would be, she's famous, as you could tell by the picture, for her makeup. In fact, there was a documentary about her life called The Eyes of Tammy Faye. How many of you have seen this movie? Only one of you. Well, that's one more than the 9:15 service, I tell you. And for the rest of you, you need to get some culture here in this congregation. Come on. It's a classic. It's a cult classic. I mean, how many documentaries about a televangelist can you see that's narrated by a drag queen named RuPaul? Which is what this documentary is all about. And so I would encourage you to check it out. But the back of the documentary says, Tammy Faye had unwavering faith in two things, Jesus Christ and mascara. So anyway, so the story goes in this documentary that Tammy Faye Baker, too, had her struggles, that life wasn't just easy peasy for her and her husband, even though they grew this big old empire. They started a television program called PTL, which stands for Praise the Lord, right? And they launched satellite dishes all over, all over the world and various programming. And they built what's called Heritage USA. How many of you have heard of that? It's a theme park complete with water parks and other amusement type of activities just for Christians, right? Big old wholesome fun. And lo and behold, this empire, this kingdom that they built together began tumbling down. And it was all because of another televangelist that you all may have also heard about, a man by the name of Jerry Falwell, who was the head of the moral majority, right, back in the 1980s. So what Jerry Falwell did was basically what's known as a hostile takeover, not just of PTL, but also of Heritage USA. And this led not just to the demise of the Baker family, but it also landed Jim Baker in prison. So Tammy Faye, when interviewed, said, I had some options of what I could do and how I could choose to deal with the situation and to deal with Jerry Falwell. So she said, rather, however, than going down a certain path, this is what I chose to do. I'll let her speak for herself. I love that little old lady with the camera. That's right. And that's the greatest lesson I learned from this, is that there ain't nothing we could do about the past. The past is dead. And I'm sorry, but as your minister, I love to be able to offer some comfort to you and offer some pastoral care by somehow pressing the Control-Z button in life, that somehow I could undo what happened before. But unfortunately, that's not possible. And so how do we move forward? So if that whole scenario that she talked about didn't work for you, if we all can't just give it up to the Lord and say, Lord, you take care of Jerry Falwell, And by the way, these two people are actually dead, so it's kind of ironic that she would use the dead metaphor at this point. But what process can we go through in order to shed our resentment, in order to transform our lives so that we would start anew and have a new beginning and write a new chapter in life? So if that metaphor didn't work for you, there's another metaphor given by the Reverend Paul Boothby, who's a Unitarian Universalist minister. So he says that it dawned on him when he was taking a walk by the beach and encountered a sea glass of how powerful a metaphor that is for resentment. Because after all, he said, how does a sea glass begin? It begins with a broken piece of glass, does it not? And that broken piece of glass is practically useless. And not only that, it's sharp around the edges and it's ragged. And isn't that often how we feel whenever we get hurt in life initially? We feel broken and we feel sharp around the edges. And sometimes when people step on it, they get a wound, right? And if we don't treat that wound gets infested and it gets infected and it gets all the other whatever other words one could come up with, right? Bad things happen, in other words. And so what happens in order for that sea glass, that broken sea glass, to be transformed? Well, one thing is we throw it in the ocean and let nature do its natural course of the waves coming in and the rocks around it, softening up the edges a little bit. In other words, we let life take its course, and we kind of let nature take its course, right? And pretty soon, that sea glass ends up being such a beautiful thing, something that Megan could probably use for her recycled art projects, and something that jewelry stores in the Philippines sell for an exorbitant amount of price, just because they have made something beautiful out of it. So the sea glass becomes transformed into something expensive and beautiful and extraordinary. So what if that was the same process we went through in order to gain freedom from our resentment? The sea glass metaphor and the sea glass analogy. And I thought to myself, what if this were applied not just to our personal lives and our personal resentments, but what if nation to nation practiced this? Can you imagine the implications of that? Can you imagine how there would be peace on earth and goodwill toward all people if this were really practiced? I don't know how many of you turned the pages of your newspaper yesterday, but yesterday there was an article about the 77th anniversary of the massacre at Nanjing. How many of you know about this terrific, not terrific, but horrific, I should say, tragedy? Great, a few of you. So what happened 77 years ago was that Japanese troops started to invade China. And there's still some discrepancy as to how many civilians actually died, but the Chinese government estimates it at around 300,000. That's a lot of people, and that makes a huge dent in a city's population, even in China, as populous as it is. And so, and not only that, not only did these people die, but some of them died horrific deaths, especially the women. So a lot of women and girls were actually raped in the process. So Nanjing was a horrific, terrible incident that should be erased from human history. And so the Chinese government, which is not necessarily known for their compassion or acts of human rights to begin with, decided to commemorate the event, not by seeking retaliation against the Japanese government. And what actually softened my heart yesterday when reading this article is that they actually said, it's not the entire Japanese population's fault. It's just these few Japanese militants and militarists, they call it, who did this atrocious act, right? So the Chinese government in this instance actually practiced compassion, and they try to let go of hanging on to that resentment by saying, we forgive you. That we're going to commemorate this day by saying, this kind of act should never, ever happen again. And what courage it takes to get to that point. And I thought to myself, there was another atrocious act done during World War II, and that was during the incident called the Shoah, right? Or the Great Holocaust against the Jewish people. And out of the ashes arose a survivor by the name of Viktor Frankl. How many of you have heard of this guy? Powerful writer and a great speaker. And here's what he had to say. He said, "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the people who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a human being but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." How we act and how we liberate ourselves from suffering is up to us. How we deal with the resentment depends on our actions. What we say and do can and does indeed make a difference in the shape of our lives in the future. I'm just going to leave you with one thought, one final thought, as you go through this process of letting go of your resentments this season before we enter the new year. And that is that I hope each and every single one of us puts the mafia out of business by the end of the year. Now, what do I mean by this? Don't you agree that the mafia specialize and capitalize on resentment and grudges? You know? Oh, Betty, are you talking to me? Are you talking to me? Don't you realize what your grandfather did to my grandfather? You know, it goes all the way back, right? And it's all about building up and building up on that resentment. So if we were to put them out of business, what would that look like? What would our world look like? What would our racial relationships look like in this country? How can we transform the world we live in? In order to truly have a happy holiday, I encourage each of us to transform into that beautiful sea glass instead. So may our lives be chipped away and smoothed away by the waves and the ocean washing over us as we gain freedom from resentment this season. Are you with me? All right. Amen.